All right. My final project is on electrification in rural America. So the context of this, the largest context, production revolution. It's involved widespread adoption of mechanization, chemical fertilizers, pesticides. All of this added to the amount of capital required for farming, but it also increased production drastically. The New Deal, so 1930s pulling the U.S. out of the Great Depression. Um, and as far as electrification goes specifically, you had the Tennessee Valley Authority in 1933, and then the Rural Electrification Administration in 1935. Um, and the REA um, gave low interest loans to nonprofit co-ops made of locals to install the electricity themselves. And some of these co-ops are still in existence today, providing power to rural America. Um, you had extension services. Um, they went to farm homes, demonstrated new technologies, primarily um, in the home, directed towards women and gardening and things like washing machines, dishwashers, irons, all of which were possible as far as, like in-home appliances were possible because of electricity. You have World War II um, and overproduction as a result of the war ending, because food production obviously had to ramp up for the war. And when the war ended, there was much less demand for food. So that leads to falling prices. Um, but all of these things lead to more industrialization of farms and a decrease in the number of small family farms. Which brings us to the benefits of electrification, and my source is particularly interested in tobacco farming. My source was written in 1946 and is a compilation of research and potential benefits of electricity, specifically for tobacco farming, but it applies across the board. First, we have water. So, um, bed water before planting tobacco, it is beneficial to have damp soil and increases yield. So electricity can help with irrigation for the bed. It was also discussed about curing the bed, like pasteurizing the soil before you plant. So pre-planting preparation, a lot of that can be accomplished with electricity. You have irrigation, which may increase yield for tobacco, but at the time of writing, it needed more research because they had a Tennessee Valley Authority farmer test that showed increased yields from irrigation, and this was with a gas pump. But the author or compiler of the source from 1946 said that this potentially could be solved better with electricity. Um, so they were looking into irrigation, and obviously with other crops, irrigation is beneficial. And drinking water, which increases quality of life for farm families because they typically had to carry buckets of water a long ways from a well or a spring to the house and had no indoor water. Something we take for granted, but that was a huge benefit of electrification at the time. You had the curing process in tobacco. Electricity was found to not be economical at the time as a heat source because the barns for curing have to be heated to dry out the tobacco. But it was mentioned that insulation also needs improvement, and electricity could potentially be used with insulation as a heat source. When at the time it was being used to control coal stokers and oil burners, um, to control the temperature as like a control method. And experiment stations had success with electric fans controlling humidity, which could be used in conjunction with sprayers, which is another important part of the curing process is rehumidifying. So it can be handled so it's not brittle. So using electric humidifiers could be a benefit as well. You have light, which can be used for security. You have outdoor lights, you can see what's going on at night. You can see if anybody's trying to mess around. It allows work in the dark, and both sources, Weaver and Jones, list this as a benefit. You can work without daylight, which is a big benefit for farms. It allows for work without natural light, increased efficiency of dark operations like milking, and milking specifically, both Weaver and Jones mentioned, even though Weaver is focused on tobacco. So electric light, huge for the dairy industry. It also has less risk of fire for lighting as compared to oil lamps. Barns are combustible. Oil lamps operate with a flame. Not a good combination. My old granddad tells stories of tobacco barns that were lost to fires. And Weaver gives numbers, and it's a significant percentage of barns that are lost to fire. Um, refrigeration, obviously important to dairy, allows for mass production of milk. Um, automatic feed and water, and that made the poultry industry viable to have automatic feed and water in the chicken houses. So that led to large scale production of broilers. And then you have quality of life and luxury. You have radios, irons, home appliances, indoor plumbing, which allow for restrooms and even Christmas lights, all of which electricity enables to increase quality of life on farms. So the larger themes that this contains research stations. So a lot of what Weaver talks about was done in research farms or research stations. Um, these allowed for advancements in farming technique, leading to higher yield. Production revolution, as we mentioned, improvements in plant animal varieties, machines, chemical fertilizers, and pesticides. Um, electricity falling under the machines and pumps for fertilizers, pesticides, and irrigation as well. Um, industrialization, fewer farms were producing more food. So like going back to chicken houses and dairy farms being viable thanks to electricity on a large scale. So fewer farms were producing more food. A lot of that thanks to electrification. Um, New Deal, the TVA and REA bring electricity and modern life to rural Americans. And also the New Deal provided funding for the purchase of new equipment, all of which led to less labor required to make the same yield. So these things were meant to save farmers, but they wound up increasing the required capital for farming and decreased the required labor, forcing thousands of farmers out of the business. And in a way, contradicting the aim of the programs, which was, obviously to help rural farmers. And it wound up industrializing farms even more, and in a way, making it more difficult for them. So, in summary, the source shows the importance of technological innovation in agriculture during the production revolution, specifically research stations. It's really interesting how connected that this source is to research stations. You got federal programs, a lot of sponsorship sort of things, loans, electrification programs, obviously, and also extension services, all helping to pull the country out of the depression and extended through World War II. Positive impact on quality of life and optimism about the future post World War II. The 1946 source from Weaver also includes a lot of optimism. You can tell by the tone of the source, it's very optimistic about the future of agriculture and technology in agriculture. All these programs and innovations were meant to help farmers, but resulted in more farmers being put out of business. And this is time period, the source is written in 46. Obviously, World War II ended in 45, and that brought enormous technological innovation and advancements. And this outpaced small farmers and led the Secretary of Agriculture at the time, or former Earl Butz, to say agriculture is changing from a way of living to a way of making a living. So all of that to say, it's moving agriculture away from the Jeffersonian ideals and more toward the commercial large scale agriculture that we know today. But that also made it possible to have things like supermarkets, and that, of course, leads into themes through the Cold War and into the present. So very interesting source. Um, a lot of connections to a lot of things we see today, connections to my granddad as well, since he worked on the tobacco farms when he was young. So that's another reason I found the source interesting. Very cool. Um, Interesting to see the perspective of the source at the time in the 40s to our current perspective looking back and the differences in the vision there. That is all. Here are my sources. Um, Weaver was the one from the special collections, and this is my outside source from the library. So that is all.